Our next presenters will be Ms. Denise Livingston and Ms. Jessica Paz. Ms. Livingston is a water conservation specialist. She serves as the support staff for the Water Conservation Advisory Council, WCAC, and provides technical assistance to utilities in water conservation planning. Denise has a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Physical Science from Black Hills State University. She has 20 years of experience in rural community development, administrative management, project coordination, and water resource management. Denise considers herself to be a blend of adventurer, self-improvement specialist in training, a gardener extraordinaire, and challenge hurdler. Now, Ms. Paz is a water conservation specialist with the Texas Water Development Board, where she reviews annual conservation reports and water conservation plans. She has a BS in biology and a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, and has spent her career working in education, communications, and water. She currently represents the Rio Grande Valley as a chapter chair in the TAWWA Education Division Committee and WEAT Public Communications and Outreach Division Committee, and is serving as the president of the TWUA Citrus District. So please welcome with me Denise and Jessica. Thank you.
Dr. Spencer Johnson wrote a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And in this book, it tells a story of two mice and two little people that live in a maze. And in this maze, life is all about the cheese, right? So these four characters come across this section of in the maze that is filled to the rafters with cheese. I mean, just imagine this room filled with cheese. And life is all about the cheese. So every day, these characters keep going back to the same part of the maze and enjoy life. Life is good. The two little people even put up lounge chairs and posters everywhere of how great cheese is, until one day, tragedy strikes. And as you guessed it, the cheese isn't there. And that's where our story really begins, because this is a story about navigating change. And we thought, what a perfect story for a conference of the same name. So what do you do when change occurs? How do you react? Well, in our story, Sniff and Scurry, the two little mice, they don't miss a beat. The cheese isn't there. There's no reason for them to be there. They put on their running shoes and phew, out into the maze they go, right? Well, the two little people, Hem and Haw, a very different story. Who moved my cheese? That's our cheese. We are entitled to that cheese. We've been wronged. You know what? I bet if we stay here, the cheese will come back tomorrow. So they return the next day, and the next day, and the cheese isn't there. They keep on expecting the situation to change back to something that's going to accommodate them. But if we deny and resist when change occurs, what does that really look like? If we were to apply the Hem and Haw approach, what would happen? Well, let's take a look. In 1975, Kodak developed the digital camera. The leaders at the time thought, you know what, this is a fad. We don't have to worry about it. We've been kings in the industry for a long time. Get back to work, business as usual. So they put their head in the sand and failed to innovate. And in 2012, they filed for bankruptcy. Remember any of these characters? The same situation. Companies that fail to innovate. They opted for the status quo, refused to take advantage of new technology or opportunities. They hemmed and hawed themselves out of business. So back to our story. After a few days of returning to the cheeseless section in the maze, Haw starts to figure it out. He's like, this isn't working for me. I think I'm going to be better off taking my chances in the maze. And so he decides to face his fear, that fear that we all have at some point in our life, that fear of, if I do this, what if this happens? If I do this, what if worst case scenario happens? But he decides to venture out into the maze, and as he goes along, he finds little morsels of cheese, little bits of encouragement to go on and on. And then he realizes he has these aha moments, and he starts writing them on the wall, just in case Hem, who refused to go along with him, decides to follow. He's like, change happens. You know, before we got to that cheese section in the maze, we were someplace else, but we had to find another section of cheese. So cheese happens. And we can anticipate change. We should have saw that change coming. We should have monitored better. If we monitor and see that the cheese is getting low or maybe it's getting old, you know, it's time for a change. And then we can adapt to change quickly if we're prepared and we monitor, and then we can change. And we can enjoy where we are until we have to go through it again. After all, the only constant seems to be change. So in the 1950s, Texas suffered a catastrophic drought, known today as the drought of record. When that happened, the state's like, you know, we need to plan better. We need to be better prepared should another drought of record occur today. We can't afford to have 244 counties out of 254 counties were declared disasters, and we can't let that happen again. So they created the Texas Water Development Board with the mission to lead the state's efforts in securing a secure water future. So today, our main responsibilities at the Texas Water Development Board are data collection and dissemination. We are all about the science. Former board member Kathleen Jackson said, the better the science, the better the data, the better the data, the better the policy. So science is very much a part of who we are and what we do. Water supply and flood planning. We recently, after Hurricane Harvey, the state recognized, you know, we are doing planning for another drought of record, but we have flooding issues as well. So we started with developing a flood plan. And just up till recently, this is the first state flood plan, so we are like leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else. And the flood plan just finished going through public comment last spring. We had over 300 public comments. It is getting redrafted. It goes to the board next week for review and final approval, and then it'll be published probably this fall yet. So it's a very fresh, hot off the press plan. And many of you, your utilities probably have benefited from financial assistance. So we are also a bank. So we are the kids with the money. So we're the cool kids. So today, we're going to talk about water supply planning. What Texas Water Development Board does is we develop a state water plan that looks at a 50-year period. So every 5 years, we update this state water plan with the most recent one done in 2022. I just want to also mention that in the late 90s, the state recognized that we needed more of a bottom-up approach or a grassroots approach to our planning. So that's when they created the regional water planning areas. And there's 16 regional water planning groups in the state. And the regional water plans and the state water plans all get our data from you, from the water use surveys. So the state recognized that, you know, a drought of record, that's a pretty big change. So we got a plan for that. So let's take a look at what was in the, what's in the current state water plan. Let's look at some of those crystal ball moments that we have. It's projected that by 2070, we're going to have a 73% population increase. So 73%, that's a pretty big chunk. The drought of record, if it was to occur in 2020 without any strategies from the state water plan implemented, we're looking at $110 billion in economic damages, $153 billion in 2070. Existing water supplies by 2070 are expected to decrease by 18%, and that's due to groundwater depletion and sedimentation of our reservoirs. And then here's another big one. 29% of our future water needs to come from conservation. 29%. And so let's think about that for a minute. And if we put the whole state of Texas in a little bubble, and let's call it your utility, and we're looking at 29%. So every year, you're using your little bubble, no external forces, you're using 1 million gallons, we'll just say, for simple math. And then every year, 1 million gallons, everything's fine, hunky-dory fine. Then one day, you get a knock on the door. Maybe it's the universe, maybe it's TCEQ telling you, you only have 700,000 gallons to use this next year. Well, what are you going to do at that point? Are you going to hem and haw and go business as usual? And then by August 31st, you're done. You're out of water. There's not a drop to be had. No iced tea or lemonade on the back porch, no water skiing on Labor Day weekend. There's nothing out there for you. So let's say that you sniff and scurry into action. How are you going to get there? what are some of the things that you can do? Well, Jessica will talk more about developing a plan, but we do need to have some kind of a roadmap. Now, we're not talking, some of you have to report to Texas Water Development Board, your annual reports or your water conservation plans. But we're not talking about just the entities that have to report to us. We're talking about all utilities. And I'm going to get on a soapbox for a minute here, because Texas Water Development Board, you saw our mission. We are leading the state's efforts in a secure water future. But we can't provide a secure water future for you, without your utility. So we might have a secure water future in our mission statement, but unless your utility also adopts a modified version of that mission statement, we're not going to be successful. So every utility in here, your utility has to internalize that mission and say, my utility is dedicated to providing a secure water future for our community. And if every utility can come up with that kind of mission statement and own that, then we'll have success. But the other things that we can do, if we have a roadmap of where we are now and where we want to be in the future, that would be a pretty good best management practice to have. Another thing that the state has done is created something called the Water Conservation Advisory Council. And this is a pretty cool entity. It's a 23-member board of water professionals across numerous sectors. And this is federal agencies are represented, TCEQ is represented on this board, nonprofits, and mining and engineering. So 23 different sectors. And then they're charged with every other year providing a legislative report to the state talking about trends and issues in water conservation across the state. They also build recommendations, and then they also create something called best management practices. And these best management practices, and we're going to look at one here shortly, and Jessica will talk about them a little bit more, but these are designed to help you achieve your conservation goals. And here is the list for municipalities. So it's a pretty extensive list here. And some of you are probably already doing some sort of best management practice. These are some of the low-cost or no-cost BMPs that you can implement. If you have 3,300 or more connections, you're required to have a conservation coordinator now. But are you using that conservation coordinator to the fullest extent of what you can be using them? So the BMP will kind of give you some more information on what it takes or what they can be doing to really enhance your conservation program. I pulled this one out. This is a water, so you could kind of see this. This is the water, utility water audit and water loss. This is a 10-page BMP, so there's a lot that goes into it. It's kind of like that. Does anybody remember those Schoolhouse Rock videos? And that one, I'm just a bill, oh, I'm only a bill. You know, it takes a lot to get a bill passed into a law. It's the same with the best management practice. They go through a lot of vetting in the Water Conservation Advisory Group. And then once it gets past there, it comes to Texas Water Development Board, where it has to run the gamut of being reviewed by staff and upper management before a big cheese signs off on it and it gets onto our website. Here it says this BMP is intended for all utilities. Well, you know what? All the BMPs are intended for all utilities. We are hoping that in some fashion you can use these BMPs. The other reason I wanted to bring this BMP up, talking about water loss, Mark Mathis is our part of our water loss division. So Jessica and I are the conservation girls, and then we have 5 people that do water loss. So you can think of our department as the don't use it people and the don't lose it people. But we have a validation program is coming up starting on January 1. And that validation program is if you have a funding requirement with Texas Water Development Board right now, or you come in for funding primarily with the drinking water SRF, not the lead service one, but just the regular drinking water SRF, you will be required to have your most recent water loss audit validated. So that's coming up. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you need to use leak detection equipment, we will provide leak detection equipment for you at no cost. Well, I don't want to say no cost. We will get it to you, you use it, and then you have to pay to get it back to us. So pretty good deal. You don't have to buy your own. We'll help you with that. So we talked about change happening. And so then the next on the list is anticipating change. We talked about increasing population. Are there other changes out there that we can anticipate? Here are some news articles that we have that we can anticipate. We have record high temperatures that have been coming down the wire, lower water flows into lakes and streams, water quality issues. Is anybody here planning on retiring in the next 5 years? What's going to happen to the institutional knowledge that you have? Or staffing issues. We're having staffing issues. Fortunately, we have the SETH program that is hopefully getting ramped up that will help with that. How many people here wear multiple hats? I know Jessica and I do. So yes. So there's a lot of changes that we can anticipate. So we talked about change happening. We talked about changes that we can anticipate. The next thing is monitoring change. And this is where we segue to Jessica.
So thank you, Denise. So now that we've anticipated change, what's next? We've seen all that data, that the news articles that showed things are happening. What's going to happen? Follow the writings on the wall. We get ready for that cheese to move. Now, how do we anticipate change? By monitoring it. And by monitoring it, we use reporting. Now, reporting is going to help us identify any changes or needs happening within your entity at the local level so that we can get those statewide numbers that we need. Are we going to need any information on PFAS? Do we have any line breaks happening? Is this more frequent happening? Are we having water loss issues within our entity? Any shortages, rates need to be increased? We want to make sure that we find these trends happening at the local level and statewide. Without this data, we're not going to know what works, what doesn't work, is it effective in our utility, and what needs to be improved. For example, right here, you can see that population increase Denise talked about. What's going to happen? You're annexing more land. Are you ready for that? Did you see that trend happening already? Were you paying attention to it? So that's where we move forward to some reporting. I know you all have a million reports to do constantly. Another one to the list. Denise mentioned 2 that we talked about with the water use survey and the water loss audit. She briefly mentioned those a bit. Now, we are going to add 2 more. Now, some of you might be familiar with this annual conservation report. And so this is actually to evaluate your entity's progress over the past year. See the name? Annual? That means every single year, by May 1st, you are going to complete your annual report. And this report has 5 different sections. We have system data, water use accounting, programs and activity, leak detection, water loss, and of course, water loss targets and goals. Now, all of this is to evaluate your entity's effectiveness based on your water conservation plan. Now, that conservation plan we'll talk about in a bit, but it's not just something you look at, write it, forget about it. You're evaluating it, seeing what you've done throughout the year within your plan, and initiating it. Did it work? Did it work? Did it not? Now, all these reports need to be done in sequential order. Now, that, like I said, water use survey, you do that first, then you work on your water loss audit, then you get us your information for your annual report, and then so forth. Now, some of this data auto-populates over from one report to the next. So if you jump into one, you're gonna be like, why is my information not here? I can't manually enter it. Well, it's because it auto-populates over. So if you made a mistake and you notice these numbers look off in my annual report and it's not letting me make these changes, that means we need to backtrack a bit. We need to see what happened in your other reports. Now, unfortunately, Denise and I only look at these annual reports and forward with the utility profile on the conservation plan. We have the other teams for the water use survey team and the water loss audit team that look at everything else. And so we reach out to them we work on those issues. Now, also, this data needs to be reported on our online portal. Is anyone an authorized user on that online portal? Heard of it? Luck? Yeah, loss. What is it? Loss, use, and conservation. Thank you. And so you become an authorized user, you enter your data, and go from there. So from there, for example, this year, we're in 2024, correct? Now, we currently cannot go and enter data because we're still in the year for reporting. So as soon as January 1st hits, we can start gathering 2024 data, putting it into our annual report, and submitting it by May 1st. Everyone's asking, why May 1st? Well, I don't know. That's our date. What happens after May 1st? Well, you're late. But want to make sure you do it by May 1st. Now I'm going to go over some of these sections. A lot of people have questions on, but hopefully I can give you a brief overview. Now, section 1, system data, pretty straightforward. If you look up there, many of you have seen this report, whether it's a PDF or on that Lux system. You can see we just ask, well, not here, but you can see we ask for your contact information. Done. Kind of like your first 10 points on the test, right? Put your name, address, conservation coordinator. You'd be surprised if you're not paying attention. We have had entities fill that out wrong. So please pay attention. Then we have some data that auto-populates into our water use accounting data. Now from there, it is auto-populated. I just make sure that there's no negative numbers, there's no single digits, things like that, to then report back and be like, something looks a little bit off. I want to make sure those numbers look pretty accurate. If we're showing that you used 1 gallon for the year, kind of looks suspicious. Then we get to section 3. This is the meat of it. This is my favorite section because we get to see your best management practices. So Denise talked about them a little bit. It shows us what you've used in your conservation plan that you previously had adopted. And now it shows you a list of all your best management practices. You check off if you've implemented it within that year from your plan. And then if you have the estimated gallons saved or reused, you input that data. You're probably asking, Jessica, I don't track this. I don't know this information. I don't know how much a conservation coordinator saved in estimated gallons of water. That's okay. Just put 0. Maybe next year you can track away. Maybe some parts of this best management practice will say, okay, you know what? We can meter this number for reuse. We can say that our students we're educating, we've educated them, and we hope that every time that they use the water, every student we reach out to is now losing, X amount of water, or not using that much water anymore. Let's estimate how many we've reached, and so forth. Now, like I said, if you don't have that number, just put a 0. Now, there's a reuse section on there. A lot of people confuse that, and they're like, well, I reused it, so I saved it. So I'm going to put the number in both, because I metered that. Well, if we do that, you're kind of double counting that. So we want to make sure if anything has to do with reuse, you stick it in reuse, and just saved and saved. Further down from that, you're going to see a total estimate on pricing. That goes with how much your water is being charged, your current rate, whatever you want to use for that, and you multiply that by your estimated gallons saved or reused. Now, if you don't have that number either, that's okay. A lot of people also continue on. They're like, it's not letting me submit. It's not letting me continue. Well, that's because when you check one off, if you don't put zeros or numbers, it's not going to let you continue. So just make sure anything you check off has a number in it, whether it's 0 or X amount. It's also going to ask you some questions about your rates. Did your rate structure change within that 2020 or 20X year? So this coming year, it's going to say, did your rate structure change in 2024? Oh, well, you know what? City Council is going to pass it for March of 2025. So no, it stayed the same that last year. So then you put no or yes. And then we ask you, what type of pricing structure do you have? You check off whichever one it is. And there's also little clicks that you can, links that you can click with some information if you're not sure which pricing structure it is. Then we go into our public awareness and education activities. You're probably asking, well, that's one of the BMPs. Well, yes. Now we want to know what you used. Do you have brochures in your lobby? Yes. Okay, is it there year round? How many days is that? Well, how many days is your lobby open? How many, did you put out 100 and you come back at the end of the year and you had 2? Do you restock it frequently? Okay, well, that's how many you've reached. Do you have messages about conservation on your bills, social media, your website? You may not handle your website, but if you quickly just, Google search yourself and you see, oh, our social media team or our agency that we reached out to does say conservation tips on there. It might be a link to another website like ours or TCQ that has those tips. We want to make sure you write that down. So any one you click off, also you need to make sure you put in that input of that number. That's mostly the bulk of the information you're going to be inputting. We go into our leak detection and water loss section. It's more about your meters. How many meters did you replace? How many were tested, repaired, larger and smaller than 1.5 inches. Now, we also ask for production meters. That's a common question that we get. Production meters, we're not asking for the total number of meters. We want to know how many are from your facility out into your system. So it's usually low numbers. And if you purchase water, you don't have that production meter. So we want to make sure you don't just total all of those meters together. And we don't leave that information blank either. Also, do you have AMI metering? Okay. So pretty straightforward over the year. Then we go into our water loss targets and goals. And that auto-populates information and kind of gives you a projection of what's going on currently in your facility and what's going to happen in the future. That's pretty much it for that annual report. We want to make sure it's done annually and it's submitted on time. But if you're part of an entity that reaches requirements to continue further reporting, that would include the utility profile. Now, this one is done every 5 years. Now, how many of you, did anyone submit a utility profile this year with a conservation plan? So you might be on your 5-year cycle. It could be that you're due 2024, then you're due again in 2029, maybe you're due 2025, you're due 2030. So it goes in that order right there. This is gonna let us know what happened the past 5 years. So we had our annual one. We can then review each annual report for the past 5 years, and you input your data into this utility profile. You're going to have your information, population, system input, demands, did you get new customers? Did you get new connections for water system data, some accounting data and use, and then some wastewater data. So you just kind of fill this out over the past 5-year information. Now, this is going to help you develop your water conservation plan. Now, as you're doing this, it's kind of like a snapshot of that usage history of your system. Now, this 5-year history creates that 5-year vision. You saw those trends. You saw what was happening. What are we going to do moving forward? Do we need to change our BMPs? Do we need to add BMPs? What's going to happen? Was there a drought? Was there a flood? Was there a freeze? Now you're seeing everything side by side, monthly, yearly. Okay, our peak demand time, summertime. What if you're using all your water in January? What does that mean? What's going on here? Did one year have more water use than others? Was there a freeze that time? What happened? So you kind of look over if these trends, what happens with these trends. Now, by utilizing these reports, you can adapt and change to formulate that water conservation plan. Get rid of these old habits, old ideas, and practices that aren't working and aren't beneficial, and focus on what does work. Adapt to the change quickly. Quicker you let go of the old cheese, the sooner you can enjoy the new cheese. So we want to go over this water conservation plan. This ties it all together. And the purpose of this plan is to ensure water secure future and the water use efficiency within your operation. Now, this is a strategy or a combination of strategies used for your consumption of water, loss of water, use of water, reuse of water. And so we want to see what benefits your entity. Your entity isn't going to match the other entity next door or the one in North Texas and South Texas and so forth. Some of you might have 100-page documents. Some of you might have 30. Some of you have one. As long as you meet these bare minimum requirements of this water conservation plan checklist and the targets and goals, you are good to go. So this is not a report. It is a plan. It is a document, and I like to say it's a living document. It does actually change every 5 years and get adopted every 5 years and modified, reviewed. We want to make sure we take a good look at your best management practices so that you can see what worked and what didn't work and that the details matter. The more information you give to us, that's the more information you're telling yourselves, your entity, that future coworker that comes in, that new director that comes in that has no idea what's going on with your entity. Maybe they want to come in and they're like, we need to redesign this whole thing. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Look at our plan. This is what worked, what didn't work. Let's move forward. This is showing that you are using things to benefit your system. So if you're not required to do a plan, like Denise mentioned, doesn't mean I don't have to do one, I'm not going to do it. It means, okay, well, let me take initiative. Let me work on a plan, see what we can do. You might not get reviewed, but it might help you with your water loss, your information, anything like that. So if you look up here, we have that. I'm not going to go over every single part of this checklist, but we do ask for your 5 and 10-year goals. We give you a baseline, a 5-year historic average to go with, and then from there you kind of realize, okay, how much are we going to decrease in total residential and water loss in GPCD? A lot of you actually have to show us a table of that or fill out information about it that says water loss. Don't use percent. That's not going to work. We're not going to ask for percent. We want to see in GPCD. We want to see all your information. We already went over education information. That's done. You already know information about your meters. Implementation, then you kind of go forth, make sure it gets passed, add us your drought contingency plan, and go from there. Now, I mentioned these best management practices. Denise mentioned them too. Now, these, we call them BMPs. It's just a little bit easier. Now, these help you figure out what is directly or indirectly implemented within this specified time frame of these 5 years. You're looking at your 5-year information. Okay, we looked at the past 5 years. Now, what's going to happen in the next 5 years as we're working on this? So we do have 8 categories, and they're not exclusive to any other conservation techniques you might do. Now, you look at these to formulate your plan. Like Denise said also, you're probably already doing some of these. Now, these 8 sections do have their subsections that tell you what's going on. For example, conservation analysis has a conservation coordinator on there. If you're required to have one, you're already checking off that BMP. You have system operations BMP, metering of all new connections. Done, right? If you're already doing it. You have education and public awareness. Are you putting that public information out there? You already talked about it in your annual report, your utility profile. Okay, then you're done. And so forth. Landscape BMPs, are you doing any reuse? Things like that. So you just go over what you've been doing, what can you do in the future, and go from there. Now that you've adapted, you're making that new water conservation plan, we want to keep it front and center. Don't just, okay, I turned it in, we're good to go, let's just business as usual. No, we don't want to do that. We want to keep it front and center. It gives the new staff a basic understanding of your system's institutional knowledge. You want to move with the cheese, continue forward, and you can even think of it as a camera. Focus on the good, develop from the negatives, and if things don't work out, take another shot, right? So we want to keep our communities vibrant. We want to keep them active and going. What are we doing for our conservation measures for it? Now, doing all this will lead you to our last phase, enjoy the change. Savor the adventure and enjoy the new taste of new cheese. This is where you can enjoy that water-secure future. You're going to keep adapting. You're going to keep moving forward and being innovative. Like I said, what didn't work, what worked. And then you know what? You do it all over again in 5 years. So referring back to the story that Denise was telling us, who moved our cheese? We want to encourage you to move with the cheese. Which character are you in that story? Hem, haw? We want to think about this excerpt right here. Haw smiled. He knew Hem was wondering, who moved my cheese? But Haw was wondering, why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? Why didn't you get up and follow conservation sooner? What could you have done before that day zero happened? Once again, my name is Jessica Paz. We have Denise Livingston right over there. And we are with the Texas Water Development Board, and we would love to help you with your plan, your utility profile, your annual report, any questions you have on it. We have other team members as well. And if you have any questions about your reports or just general questions, we'd be happy to help. If you want to come back up here, Denise. Thank you. I do want to add that this year is a big submittal year for us. We have, maybe 800 entities due this year for 2024 submittals. Let's just say we haven't received all 800. And so if you don't, that kind of rolls over and rolls over. And as that data rolls over, that time frame rolls over, that means you're missing that past information. And when you start missing that, you kind of want to backtrack. Someone else new comes in, they want to fix things. Things get lost. So that's just a reminder just to keep up with your reporting, keep up with your plan. If you do need any help, we're here to help you. You can just email us or give us a call, and we can guide you through it.
Brent, you had a question?
Could you go into the validation just shortly? What does validation mean as y'all define it?
So Mark is our water loss person. Do you want to talk more about the validation?
So the validation process is basically confirmation of the data that you've sent us. It's more involved. We will ask for more reports, and basically the data on the report, we want receipts for that data, meaning we want paperwork showing that you did flush this amount of volume, you've got a certain volume for reported breaks and leaks. We're just going to confirm all the data. The way I normally explain it is, if you know what a CPA is, they will come in and they will audit the business. We will do the same process to the utility on the water loss audit.
And the one other thing, everyone's like, well, why should I do the conservation planning and everything? And Jessica kind of talked about it. So it's really important, especially if you're coming in for funding with the Texas Water Development Board. If you are required to report and you haven't been keeping current with your reporting, that is going to hold up any kind of funding for your entity. So it's really important that you stay on top of your reporting if you are required to report. And once again, Jessica and I are here to answer any questions for you at the table downstairs, or Lindsay's downstairs. So thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate you.